Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for my partial demonstration playthrough of a couple of turns of Mrs. Thatcher's War. Now just to explain something, the map is already looking rather busy, and the reason for that is I've decided to start my demonstration about halfway through the game on turn 9 specifically. I decided to do this because the initial part of the game doesn't reveal very much to players who've never seen this before, because of course the British had to begin the campaign with something of a softening up period. So before turn 7, they're not actually able to make the landings at San Carlos, which you can see over there. Now, I played the game up to the point where I made the landings the previous turn, so you can see the British Army units there. And that's so that you can get a flavour for what happens in a full game turn where there's ground combat happening, as well as the naval and air campaigns. So before we start, I'm just going to give you an idea of what the game looks like as laid out. So it takes up a bit of room, but not too much. I mean, you don't have to have your rule books and player aid cards lying around there as I've done. Really, the only bits you need lying flat are the two map boards. And to be perfectly honest, if you didn't want to take advantage of the discarded units strip there, you could actually just use the charts and tables as a sort of movable reference, if that makes sense. So I'm going to focus in on the two key elements, which are the game's maps. I'll tell you what, let's focus in as close as I can to begin with. Right. So here on the right, we have the strategic map. So there's the Falklands Islands surrounded by the total exclusion zone over there. And I've got the Invincible and Hermes battle groups with their respective escorts. I've stacked the available Harriers. These counters represent individual aircraft nearby, so that I remember which ships they belong to. I mean, they've got HH and HI, so I can't really forget. Over here we have South Georgia and Trala. Now these only function in the game as a holding box for British ships that either have to conduct repairs and refit, or if they're sent off on side missions. It represents the reallocation of resources to other things that are not directly involved with the Falkland Islands. So that could be convoy escort, it could be sub-hunting, it could even be a commitment of resources to a submarine offensive against the Argentine Navy. Of course, most famously, the one that resulted in the sinking of the General Belgrano. Over here, you have the Argentine coastline with the various different air corridors leading to the Falklands. And Argentine air activity is marked by these air group counters, so Roman numeral and the groups. That doesn't really have an effect on play, but it helps you to track where they are. It's also an area where any Argentine naval units that are at sea can be placed. So rather worryingly, despite the loss of the General Belgrano earlier in the game, Anaya has committed the carrier 25th of May for operations, so that's something I'm going to have to keep an eye on. Up here we have the Argentine mainland box, which holds 3 of their remaining air groups. The repair pool, theirs is currently empty. The weather table, now I've already rolled the weather for this turn and it's rain and snow, so that does have some impact on operations, but it doesn't impede air operations. And just so you all know, this weather chart is only applicable to the Falkland Islands themselves. It doesn't affect the wider operations, because every now and then the British will conduct strike missions against these airfields to try and suppress them, or simply try and create an aerial barrier to disrupt attacks on British positions on the Falklands. So over here we have Ascension Island, where we've got our reinforcements. Now, for those of you who are wondering what the landing ship USS Iwo Jima is doing there, on the diplomatic front, although the United States is sending us rather mixed messages, they have committed that in the event of a loss of a British carrier, the USS Iwo Jima is available as a stand-in. So I am very grateful for that because there have been some near-run moments already in this game. And of course, we have the Welsh Guards, the Scots Guards, and the Gurkhas on standby. Lastly, there's the British repair pool with one of Hermes's Harriers in it. Had a bit of a ding in the previous mission, but at least the plane wasn't lost outright. That's my biggest worry. So over here we have the strategic map for East Falkland. So these three coloured tracks represent the different routes of advance towards our objective, which is Stanley. For everything that's going on, the one objective I have to keep in mind as the British player is that I need to occupy Wireless Ridge, Tumbledown, and Mount William. If I take those three objectives before the end of the game, then I win. It's really that simple. If I fail to do so, then essentially the British have not managed to succeed in their aims before the weather closes in and the task force has to withdraw, and we will have to submit to arbitration and probably a very unfavourable peace. So the clock is ticking. So there's the three tracks. Once you begin advancing along them, you can't transfer from one point to another. So you're basically committed when you go. The intelligence picture of the Argentine defenders is very spotty. I know the identities and strengths of some units, but I do not have that information for others. So you may go into a battle knowing what you're fighting sometimes, like that strength 10 unit down in Darwin, but I've no idea who's looking after Goose Green. It could be something as inoffensive as an unmanned minefield, or it could be a major unit. We simply do not know. Down here, this functions mainly as the turn track, but it's also useful for keeping track of how many Exocet missiles we know the Argentines still possess. It's 3. I've so far managed to make them waste 2 of the ones in their arsenal to no effect. Hopefully I can do the same with the remaining 3, but it's going to get dicier now that we're committed to supporting the army ashore. The game turn, of course, it's the start of game turn 9, so it's late May. On the next turn, stuffed. The British get stuffed, if you'll pardon the terrible pun. Stuffed is ships taken up from trade, so merchant ships brought in to logistically support the Royal Navy and the British Army. And they are very, very vital. I am depending on them to get me my helicopters, and I'm hoping we don't have another Atlantic conveyor moment. Further along the track is the SAS unit, so they are resting after a mission I sent them on. I had tried to commit them to Operation Mikado, which was not a good idea. I thought it was worth committing them to a one-off strike against Argentina's stock of Exocet missiles. If they had succeeded, they might well have destroyed the entire stock, but it was a very long shot. But they are cooling their heels until they're ready for action again, but that won't happen until later in June. Oof. And then finally, there's the BBC News Counter. Now, the BBC News Counter represents the popularity and support for the war on the home front and internationally. If you do well and your victories are relatively bloodless, it goes up. If you do badly or do something controversial, like I did earlier in the game by sinking the Belgrano, it drops right down. And you depend on keeping that at least middling or high to successfully prosecute your war effort. So not only am I fighting an air and naval and land campaign, I'm trying to keep politicians and the public back home happy, not to mention governments overseas. It's all really, really tricky. But anyway, that's the basic geography of what we're dealing with. So on to the game. I'm just going to zoom out a bit so you have a view of the map. I'll see if I can get a bit closer. Okay. So the first thing that happens is the determination of the weather. Now, we already know this turn that we've got rain and snow. The next thing is to conduct an SAS raid. As I said, they're unavailable this turn, so I don't need to worry about that. If we had been stuffed this turn, I would be unloading my Chinook helicopters right now and be very happy about it. But as it is, the boys are going to have to yomp this turn because we do not have our choppers. And lastly, you have the chance at this stage in the turn to conduct a diplomatic feint. Now, this is a double-edged sword. By conducting a diplomatic feint, you increase your standing because you're trying to be reasonable and make overtures to the Argentinians. But in reality, we have no interest in them agreeing to talks. What we want to do is make ourselves look like the good guys. The problem with a diplomatic feint is it adds a negative modifier to you during ground combat because it looks to the world like you're doing one thing and not another. So I have to be very careful if I commit this because it's a -2 to your ground combat strength. I think it might be worth it because although our BBC News counter is already quite high up, I want to make sure it stays high up. And if you conduct a diplomatic feint, it goes up by 3, all the way up to 19. So popularity for the British war effort is riding at an all-time high. In fact, that's the highest it's ever been this game. But I do have to place the UN diplomacy counter on the turn track as a reminder. In fact, I'll put it on top so that I remember that we have at least made a show of initiating talks. So the next phase is the Argentinian Grupo being reinforced. So I am going to roll 2 dice to see if they bulk up their strength. So they get a 1 and a 5. What this simply means is you see the dice printed here. One Grupo is going to be assigned to Sector 1, which is empty. Another one would be assigned to Sector 5, but there's already 2 Grupo there, which is the maximum allowed. So the second one just remains on the Argentine mainland and is kept in reserve. So what happens next? It's now the task force phase. And the first option the British have is to attack any Argentine warships at sea with their submarines. So the 25th of May is at sea, and she does represent a very real threat to my supply line, so I am going to go for it. Now, to represent the logistical effort involved in this, you have to move one of your escort counters to the Trallar box. And that's just you supporting whether it's HMS Conqueror or another submarine. And you have to roll a 5 or 6 to sink the ship. If you don't, nothing happens and you've just committed those resources for no good reason. So holding my breath. No, we fail. So nothing happens, but the only positive side of that is there's no drop in our popularity for having controversially sunk another big warship with heavy casualties. Also in this phase, you can commit escorts to man the gun line off Stanley for naval gunfire support. But as I have no forces anywhere near Stanley, I'm not going to bother with that. You can also commit your carriers and accompanying warships to air attacks on Argentine positions here. Now, I think I'm going to take the risk and do it, but I'm going to have to send Invincible and Hermes with minimal escorts because I am going to need those to support San Carlos. And this is where it gets a bit tricky, because if you lose a carrier, it is catastrophic. So I think, given that I want to distract the Argentines a little bit, I am going to commit HMS Hermes with 3 of her available Harriers to some air ops in the north. And I am going to, rather bravely, send Invincible into the same sea zone as the 25th of May, with an equivalent number of her Harriers to conduct air operations over there. Now, there's never any interaction between opposing carrier forces in this game. They're very good at dancing out of each other's way, ironically enough. So what's going to end up happening is that Invincible's group is simply going to cause trouble for those 2 Grupo over there. And so what happens when you do this is you roll 3 dice and sum them. Let's do Hermes' attack first, and I want to roll high with this. 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh dear. The result of that, if I bring the camera over here, British escort damaged by bomb hit. Reduce BBC News by -6. Oh dear, we fluffed that one. It's just as well I stocked up on my popularity, because the BBC has gone from being ecstatic and effusive in its praise to going, that could have gone better. And the other thing is you place the British ship in the Trala box, even if it is a carrier. Now that's a good bit of consolation for me, because although one of Hermes' very small number of escorts was damaged, the carrier herself was unharmed. Thank goodness for that. That would have been a serious loss of political whatnot if Hermes had ended up on the bottom of the sea. Incidentally, to represent the versatility of carriers in conducting operations, the aircraft that I did not use from Hermes for that operation are still considered available for ops in the Falklands. It's only the pilots who are committed to the disruptive attacks that have to put their heels up and have a rest. So, okay, things did not go well with Hermes. I wonder how Invincible is doing further south. 10, that is better. Let's see what Invincible and her birds achieved. Argentine Grupo driven off by British carrier. Nice one, boys. Place the Grupo in the mainland. Yep, my pleasure. Grupo 1 can go home. And 1 random Argentine plane from the mainland to the repair pool. That's even better news. So all the Argentine air assets, their equivalent of my Harrier counters, are kept in a bag. So that means I draw 1 randomly. And as part of this attack, we have knocked out one of their Mirages. So that goes to the repair pool. I do not miss it. And then Invincible retires to the Trala South Georgia box. Sadly, the BBC is not impressed by her relative success. As ever, they're only reporting the bad news that Hermes had a near brush with death. So, sorry, Invincible, you don't make the column headlines, even though that was a very successful strike. So that ends the task force phase. We now go to Argentine air assets. So, first thing we do in this phase is roll a dice to determine what the Argentine air priority is. After we've determined the target sector. So the target sector, following the logic tree, is the sector that contains the most British ground units. Now you note from the map, the East Falkland map is divided into 5 air sectors, which pretty much divide the island into slices. So now that my troops are ashore, the target air sector is placed in Air Sector A, which is the one San Carlos occupies. And now we'll just go down the Argentine air priority numbers, which I have to roll for. Sorry, that sentence was not very clear at all. You'll see what I mean in a sec. So I've rolled a 1, which means that we start with that Grupo and work our way down. Each Grupo commits 2 aircraft counters to its target sector. And if you've got too many targets and not enough aircraft, you just do your best following the priority. So Grupo 3 has to send 2 aircraft to Sector A. And I draw a Mirage and an A4. There'll be some good news for me later in terms of the weather, but we'll resolve that in a bit. The 2 Grupo in Puerto Deseado go to Sector B. Let's just get you guys out the bag. That's a fairly hefty force. And Donadil, their ace, is accompanying this group, so I'll place them over there. Nice strong force heading for Sector B. Nobody in San Julian and one Grupo in Santa Cruz, so they'll be sending those to Sector D. Not a bad force of aircraft, another A4 and a Mirage. And there's another Grupo who sends someone to Sector E. A Dagger and a Canberra. Oh my gosh, who's still flying these things? And the very last one down in Rio Grande. Luckily for me, there's only one Argentine aircraft counter left because that is going to reinforce the target sector, and it's probably the most rubbish aircraft in the game. So that can go there. Now, the bad news for the Argentines is because the weather is rain and snow, all of their A4s now have to break off and return to base. Now, the reason for this was that these aircraft, the export versions that Argentina got, did not have onboard radar. And if the weather was absolutely hideous, as it is this turn, they ran the risk of missing the Falklands altogether in very poor conditions. So they simply could not fly. So maybe with a big sigh of relief from their pilots, they go back in the bag. And that somewhat reduces the strength that the Argentines can commit. So now it comes down to me, and I have to decide what aircraft I want to commit and where I want to commit them. And I have to think very carefully about this because in order to ensure supply, I have to enjoy air superiority over my troops and in 2 other sectors. So it's good that we have some foreknowledge of Argentine deployments because there's never enough Harriers to go around. And when you have an odd number, that doesn't help either. It's tempting to do 3, 3, and 3. What I might do, knowing where the strongest Argentine units is and taking a bit of a risk, is I will commit Morgan as flight leader and 2 of his Harriers to the target air sector. I'll commit Ward and 2 of his Harriers to Port Stanley. And I'll commit the remaining 3. Now, you see, I could do the slightly cowardly thing and just dominate Air Sector C, but I think that lonely Mirage over there is begging to be taken down, so I might do that. Now, this is risky because they can call on ground support, which may make life extremely hideous for me. So we'll see how it goes. So I've committed my air assets, but now it swings back to the Argentinians because they have a limited ability to react to the situation. And this is quite good for a solitaire game because it doesn't leave me with the advantage of always being able to counter Argentine movements. You never quite know what their final disposition is going to be. So to find out what the junta's evil plan is, I will roll a dice, and a 4 shows that they are activating Air Force Plan A. Now, Air Force Plan A is that all roundel planes, those that bear a Argentinian roundel, are redeployed to Sector A. So all of a sudden, I find myself facing a few more aircraft than I thought. And also, my chaps who went to Air Sector D suddenly found that the expected aircraft are not there because they were redeployed. So you see what I mean about the element of surprise and uncertainty. I mean, all right, it does give me dominance of Air Sector D, for which thank you very much. But it does mean my poor boys in Air Sector A are going to have a bit of an uphill battle. And I can also check for reaction on the part of their, not just their air aces, but their other committed forces. So there is a second roll for the Argentines now. They roll a 1. All eligible planes, meaning those that are not committed, are to be diverted to Sector E. So their intel is a bit faulty as well because they're worried about the threat to Stanley. Oh, actually, maybe their intel wasn't that faulty. Unfortunately for them, they do not have any uncommitted air assets with the capability to move. So no one else shifts their position, and we move straight to the air battle phase. Now, I can do this in any order I wish, but I may as well start with San Carlos and move across. So the first thing you do is call on your ground support. The British get a level of ground support for any ships and army units in the sector. So I'm just going to shunt the camera over here so you can see. So the British ground support goes up by 1 level. Now, a bit unhelpfully, British ground support only goes up by 1 level for the presence of army units, but it's regardless of how many are there, unfortunately. Whereas the Argentines, by comparison, get 1 level for each army counter that's present. Now, luckily for me, that's only 1. So Argentine ground support gives them a +3 strength bonus, and I get +4. I think that represents the slight technological edge that British AA enjoyed. So let's total up our strength points. So they've got 18, 30, 31, and with their ground support 33. And I have 25. Now what you then do is compare your attack and defense strength and come up with a percentage. Now 25 into 33 is, ooh, crumbs, not 100%. That works out at the bottom, really. It's, oh no, it doesn't. No, it's attacker strength points as a percentage of defender strength points. That is 100% and a bit, but I think you have to round down. Let me just check that. Always round down. So we're going to treat that as 65%, which is not such good odds. Let's see what happens. So I roll and get a 2. Which is attacker breaks off with defender pursuit. Now, unfortunately for me, I am the attacking side, so this is really bad news. So it means the Argentines have won the battle and have secured air superiority over this sector. That's really not good news at all. And the Argentines have the option of pursuing. So what I have to do is just count up the Argentine strength. They have to leave 2 planes behind to ensure their air superiority, but they will only pursue if they have a significant superiority over the British. So, so they have 24 to 21. That's not enough. That's not good enough odds for them, so they are not going to pursue me, and it does mean we get away with it. The only problem with that is that we unfortunately have lost air control over our own army, which is really bad. Over here in Air Sector D, there's no opposition whatsoever, so we gain very easy air superiority over there. And finally, we get to Air Sector E. So here we have the advantage, 21 strength points again, versus 8 on the Argentine side. So that is pretty much 200% advantage for us. So I'm going to roll and consult this column. Luckily for me, all the main Argentine units had moved out of Port Stanley previously to establish a defense line at the base of the mountains, so they get no ground support for this, and I get a 5. And that is Defender eliminated. That's rather nice. So Defender eliminated does not mean you're out of the game completely, but it does mean the aircraft involved are moved to the repair pool, and all being well, their owners will not see them again for some time. So I have established air superiority over Stanley. It's not quite the outcome I wanted, but I should be grateful that I haven't suffered any serious casualties while that's gone on. So we've noted the air superiority. And now that we're getting into the ground war phase, I have to look at the supply effects. So the bad news for me is because our supply is affected by the Argentine air superiority, I have to choose a stack of units which will be out of supply this turn and therefore cannot move. It's a very tough call, actually. I think I will compromise on having my center stack be the one that's delayed by being out of supply, so I can carry on with a north and a south movement. I hope that's the right choice. Now, the other problem I have is I can decide to commit escorts to look after this area. And I'm going to do that now because I think I should have actually done it a phase or two earlier, sorry, but I had left an escort to one side for the purpose. There are now going to be airstrikes out of San Carlos. Okay, now we get to a very unpleasant phase. So what you do for the San Carlos airstrikes is to add the number of Grupo counters, which is 7. This is going to sting. And sorry, I'll just double check the rules because my memory has wobbled a bit. Yeah, you roll a dice and add the number of Grupo units. So that's 10 altogether. And this is probably going to be really bad. So this is the San Carlos airstrike table. And my modified result was a 10. So British frigates sunk with heavy casualties. Subtract the modified die roll from the BBC total and retreat all escorts to Trala. Ouch. So if any of you were wondering why I built up my BBC coverage so high, it's because it's now at a very low ebb. There's really no confidence in my prosecution of the war so far. And these escorts have to head away to Trala to lick their wounds. That's not a great start at all. So now we get British movement. and it is going to be slow. So first, I'm going to order 45 Commando and 3rd Para to move into Cerro Montevideo, and we find out what this unit is. It's an Argentine patrol. Now, when you get a patrol, it's a very small unit action. You can fight them immediately, and if you defeat them, then you can move straight on, and you defeat them on a 4, 5, or 6. Ah, rats, okay. So the Argentines put up a fight. The patrol counter does disappear, but unfortunately we're forced to halt our movement there. So in a way it served its purpose because we are wasting time which we don't have. The next stack is going to the 42nd Commando, Blues and Royals, and the Royal Artillery are going to try and get past the Sussex Mountains. Now, because that's rugged terrain, they have to roll to successfully get past it. Oh no, I got a 1. Okay. So we failed dismally. We barely get out of San Carlos. Ordinarily, if you were desperate to get over it, you could nick supplies from another formation. But I can't really do that because they've already moved and they're already out of supply. So that was a terrible opener for the army. It's really not looking good. And the only ground combat was not great because a small number of Argentine soldiers held up our column in the north. So I'm a tiny bit worried about that. So finally we get to the logistics phase. You would normally check for victory at this point, but neither side is anywhere near that. British ground units now reset at this point, so anyone who's out of supply can flip back to their normal side. And also British warships in Trala get repatriated to the Falkland Islands. I'll just shift over so you can see what I'm doing. So Invincible and Hermes and their escorts go back. Now we find out what Argentine naval policy is going to be. Admiral Anaya gets to direct his ships. And he rolls a 2, which means the 25th of May stays in Rio Gallegos to continue interrupting British supply efforts. Oh dear. That's something for me